I used to think the quiet moments after dinner were the most peaceful part of my day. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint clatter of dishes being washed, and the comforting smell of food lingering in the air always made me feel like everything was in its place, that our little world was still intact. But lately, those moments had started to feel empty. It all began when my son Daniel brought home his new wife, Elise. From the first time she crossed the threshold of our home, I could tell she was different. Polite, yes. Soft-spoken, absolutely. But there was something about her, something guarded, almost fragile, as if she were holding her breath in a world that never quite felt safe. When they married, I thought it was just the usual new family tension. 2 women, 2 kitchens, 2 ways of doing things. But as the weeks turned into months, I noticed a pattern. Every Sunday, when Daniel came for dinner, Elise would arrive with her own carefully packed containers of food. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she's on a diet, I told myself. Or perhaps she had allergies, though she never mentioned any. But then I started noticing small things. She wouldn't touch anything I made, not even the salad. She'd smile apologetically and say, "Oh, I brought something lighter for myself." And when I insisted, she'd decline so gently that I couldn't even feel offended. Still, there was something about it that bothered me, the way she'd set her little glass containers on the table, each labeled with neat handwriting, each filled with food that looked oddly familiar. At first, I couldn't place it. But one Sunday afternoon, as I was cleaning up, I caught a faint scent coming from the trash can, and my heart stopped. It was my stew. The same spices, the same texture, but how could that be? Elise hadn't eaten any of mine. That night, I lay awake replaying every detail. The way she'd slipped into the kitchen while I set the table, the quiet rustle of foil, the faint sound of a spoon scraping against a pot. I told myself it was paranoia. She was probably just checking on her food, but mothers. We noticed things, and something in my kitchen had changed. The next Sunday, I decided to test a little theory. I made a batch of soup, one of Daniel's favorites, but I added a small twist. I replaced the usual coriander with parsley. A flavor change only someone familiar with my cooking would notice. That day, Elise came in smiling as usual, carrying her little bag of containers. She hugged me, commented on the weather, and made polite conversation. But when I went to the kitchen to fetch the bread, I noticed her by the stove, lifting the lid of my soup pot. Her expression wasn't casual curiosity, it was concentration. She sniffed, frowned slightly, and then quietly took out her phone to type something. That was the moment my heart began to pound. She didn't see me standing there. When I stepped forward, she startled, almost dropping the spoon. "Oh, I was just checking if it was boiling," she said with a nervous laugh. I smiled. "It's fine, dear. I just turned it off a few minutes ago." But inside, something told me that this was not just about soup. After dinner, Daniel complimented the meal, as he always did. Elise, however, only picked at her own food, while her eyes occasionally darted toward the kitchen, as if she were listening for something. When they left, I went to clean up again. And there, at the back of the counter, I found something strange, a small glass jar with a label that read, Sample 3A. Inside was a spoonful of my soup. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My name wasn't written anywhere on it, but I knew what it was. My cooking. My kitchen. My recipe. But why did she have a sample? That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I thought about Elise, her constant note-taking, her questions about my spice blends, her tendency to linger near the stove. Could she be writing a food blog? Maybe she was secretly reviewing my cooking. Or worse, was she trying to replicate it? The possibilities spun in my head until I realized there was only one way to find out. Next Sunday, I wouldn't confront her directly. I'd just watch. Quietly. Carefully. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my years as a mother, it's that people reveal themselves when they think no one's watching. And my daughter-in-law's sweet, soft-spoken Elise was about to reveal hers. The following Sunday, I prepared as though everything were perfectly ordinary. A fresh tablecloth, polished silverware, and my old apron tied around my waist, the one Daniel always said smelled like home. But inside, I was alert. Every movement, every sound in that kitchen felt amplified. I wasn't just cooking, I was watching. When Daniel and Elise arrived, they looked cheerful, almost glowing. Daniel kissed my cheek, and Elise greeted me with her usual soft smile. She carried her little cooler bag, her mysterious companion, and set it neatly by the counter. "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything today, dear," I said lightly. She smiled, her voice polite. "Oh, it's just a habit, Mom. I like knowing exactly what I'm eating." Mom. The word fell sweetly from her lips, but it rang hollow in my ears. As I busied myself with the roast, I could feel her eyes on my hands, how I measured the spices, how I tasted the broth. She didn't ask questions this time. She simply watched. Closely. Too closely. When I excused myself to set the dining table, I moved quietly to the living room doorway and turned just enough to see her reflection in the microwave glass. She was at my spice rack. Opening jars. Sniffing them. One by one. She didn't know I was watching. Her movements were precise, not curious, but deliberate. As if she were verifying something, she took out her phone again, typing, then snapping a quick picture of the spice shelf. My stomach twisted. I walked back in with a smile so steady it surprised even me. "Everything all right, Elise?" She jumped slightly, turning with a startled smile. "Oh, yes. I was just admiring your spice organization. It's so neat." I wiped my hands on my apron and chuckled softly. "Old habits, dear. A lifetime of cooking makes you a bit particular." She nodded, her eyes darting toward the pot again. As we ate, Daniel chatted about work, his new project, and some upcoming company event. Elise mostly listened, occasionally offering a quiet laugh or a comment. But I noticed her fork barely touched her plate. She was distracted. Her gaze kept flicking toward the kitchen door. That's when I realized she wasn't protecting herself from my food. She was protecting something else about it. After dinner, I told them I'd handle the dishes and urged them to relax in the living room. I could hear their laughter from the couch, Daniel's deep and warm, Elise's lighter, polite, practiced. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. As I dried the last dish, I saw her reflection again this time, standing just inside the kitchen doorway. Watching me, she thought I didn't notice. But I did. When she saw I was almost done, she stepped forward. "Here, let me help," she offered. "That's all right, dear," I said kindly. "You're a guest." She smiled, but her eyes lingered on the counter on the small container where I'd poured the leftover soup. I watched her glance at it, then at her bag. She hesitated, then shifted the strap over her shoulder as if preparing for something. I finished drying the dish and turned away deliberately, giving her the perfect opening. When I turned back, the container was gone, and so was Elise. I found her a minute later in the hallway, pretending to check her phone. "Daniel's just grabbing his jacket," she said lightly. I nodded, pretending not to notice the bulge in her bag. They left soon after. I waved from the door, my smile still plastered on, my heart beating hard beneath it. As soon as their car disappeared around the corner, I went to my phone and opened the small app Daniel had helped me install last month, one that connected to the tiny camera I'd placed in the kitchen after losing a valuable bracelet. I'd forgotten it was there. Until now. When I opened the playback from earlier that evening, I felt a chill run through me. There she was. Elise, standing by the counter while I was in the living room. She took out a small sterile jar from her bag, identical to the one labeled Sample 3A. Then she poured a spoonful of my soup into it, sealed it, labeled it 3B, and tucked it carefully away. But it wasn't just that. She also took out a test strip, the kind you use for detecting something. She dipped it briefly into the pot, waited a few seconds, then glanced at the result, frowning slightly before noting it in her phone. Then she wiped the ladle clean and set it back exactly where it had been. My stomach turned cold. She wasn't stealing recipes. She wasn't documenting my spice blends. She was testing my food. But for what? That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying that footage in my mind, her calm, deliberate motions, the quiet precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The next morning, I called Daniel under the pretense of asking about a recipe. I wanted to hear his voice, his tone, his usual ease. He sounded cheerful, oblivious. "Elise said dinner was great, Mom. You really outdid yourself." A strange ache filled my chest. Did she really say that? I wanted to tell him everything, but I didn't. Not yet. Because I wasn't sure what I'd found. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe there was an explanation, one that didn't make her sound like some kind of villain in my own kitchen. But then, a few days later, I got an unexpected knock at the door. When I opened it, Elise stood there alone holding a small basket of fruit. Her eyes were tired, but her smile was warm. "I thought I'd drop these off for you, Mom," she said softly. I invited her in, trying to mask my unease. She sat at the table, looking around the kitchen as if searching for words. Then finally she said something that made my blood run cold. "Mom, have you felt dizzy lately? Or tired?" I froze, hand tightening around the edge of the chair. "Why do you ask?" I said slowly. She hesitated, then looked me straight in the eyes. "Because I think something's wrong with your food, and I can prove it." For a long moment, I just stared at her, the words echoing in my mind. "Something's wrong with your food." Elise sat there, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but composed. The basket of fruit between us suddenly felt like a strange peace offering, one I didn't know whether to accept or fear. I forced a small laugh. "Wrong with my food? I've been cooking for over 30 years, dear. If something were wrong, I think I'd notice." Her gaze softened, but she didn't smile. "I know how it sounds, Mom, and I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." "Sure of what?" She took a slow breath and reached into her purse. From it, she pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope and placed it gently on the table. "I sent samples from your kitchen to a private lab." I blinked, my breath catching. "You what?" "I needed to know," she said quietly. "I didn't want to worry Daniel until I had proof. But the results came back yesterday." I felt my heart start to race. "Elise, that's absurd, please," she interrupted gently, her voice trembling just slightly. "Just read it." I looked at the envelope as if it were something alive. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the folded sheets inside. There were numbers, columns, charts, things I didn't understand. And then, highlighted in yellow, a single word leapt out at me. "Lead." I looked up at her, the air leaving my lungs. "Lead? You mean—" "Yes," she whispered. "There's lead contamination in your cookware. High levels. Especially in the older pots, the ceramic ones." I sat back, my hand covering my mouth. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of the refrigerator, the same sound that used to comfort me. Now it filled the silence like static. Elise's voice was low, careful. "When Daniel and I first started visiting, I noticed you seemed tired. You'd lose your balance sometimes when you stood up, and your hands would shake a little. I thought maybe it was just age. But then I realized you cooked almost everything in those same pots. The ones with the faded glaze." I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight. She continued, her words steady now, more certain. "I started researching symptoms, and they matched fatigue, dizziness, headaches. I didn't want to alarm anyone, so I brought my own food for a while. Then I began testing yours." She paused. I was hoping I was wrong. The room felt suddenly smaller. The walls seemed to press inward, every memory of laughter and dinners and family stories, now shadowed by something invisible and dangerous. My eyes drifted to the cupboard, the one where those old ceramic pots sat stacked in careful order. "My mother's pots. Handed down to me, cherished, trusted," I whispered. "Those were my mother's." Elise nodded gently. "I know. And I know how much they mean to you. But the glaze they used back then, it wasn't regulated like it is now." "I'm so sorry, Mom." Her voice broke slightly on the word Mom, and that's when I realized something. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a confession of care. I leaned back in my chair, tears welling up despite myself. "You could have told me sooner." She looked down. "I tried. But you're proud. I didn't want to sound like I was criticizing your cooking or your kitchen. I know how much it means to you to feed your family." Her words hit deeper than she could have known. Feeding my family wasn't just about meals, it was how I showed love, how I stayed needed, how I stayed connected, and she'd been protecting me from something I couldn't see. The silence stretched between us until finally, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. It was small, warm, trembling just slightly. "Thank you," I whispered, her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't," I said softly. "You saved me." For the next hour, we sat there in quiet conversation, piecing together everything she'd found. Elise had paid for the testing herself, sending small food samples from several weeks of visits. The results were consistent unsafe levels of lead, especially in anything simmered or stored in the ceramic cookware. I felt sick not from the contamination, but from the realization of how close I'd come to real harm without ever knowing. When Daniel got home later that evening, we told him together. At first, he laughed, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But when Elise showed him the report, his face changed. I could see the mix of confusion, fear, and guilt flicker through his eyes, guilt that he hadn't noticed, that he hadn't asked why his wife never ate my cooking. That night, the three of us stood in the kitchen together. Daniel held a garbage bag while I carefully, painfully, lifted each of my mother's pots and placed them inside. The sound of ceramic clinking against ceramic felt like the end of an era. When the last one was gone, I wiped my hands on my apron and looked around. My kitchen, once my domain, my pride felt bare, exposed. But beneath the sadness, there was also relief. Elise broke the silence. "We'll get you new ones, Mom, safe ones. I already found a brand that doesn't leach anything harmful." I smiled faintly. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" She shrugged softly. "You taught me that food is love. I just wanted to make sure your love didn't hurt anyone, especially you." Something in me shifted then. The walls I'd built, the quiet mistrust I'd carried, all of it began to crumble. I realized that I had been looking at Elise through the wrong lens, not as someone intruding into my world, but as someone trying to protect it in her own way. When they left that night, the kitchen was cleaner than it had been in years. Empty shelves, a silent stove, and yet it felt lighter somehow. I stood by the window, watching their car pull away, and whispered to myself, maybe love doesn't always look like we expect it to. Then I turned off the lights and, for the first time in a long time, slept peacefully. The morning after we cleared the kitchen, the house felt different. Lighter, but also hollow in a way I couldn't quite name. For the first time in years, I didn't hear the familiar clink of pots and pans, the comforting rhythm of my morning routine. The counters gleamed, the stove sat untouched, almost as if it were waiting for permission to come alive again. I made tea in a simple steel pot Elise had left behind. It wasn't my usual floral china teapot, but the water boiled quickly, and there was something reassuring about its plainness. The kind of safe I hadn't known I needed. As I sat at the table, I found myself thinking about Elise, about the courage it must have taken for her to confront me, even gently. Most people would have stayed silent, afraid of offending their mother-in-law. But she hadn't. She'd acted quietly, carefully, in a way that protected everyone without humiliating anyone. It struck me then the very thing I'd mistaken for distance had been her form of care. Her restraint wasn't coldness. It was thoughtfulness. That afternoon, Daniel called. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "Elise told me she came by yesterday." "She did," I said softly. "And she told me everything." There was a long pause. Then he exhaled. "I should have noticed something was wrong. She's been worried for weeks." "She handled it beautifully," I said. "Better than I might have." He laughed lightly, relief mingling with affection. "You know, she really wanted to make things right with you. She was scared you'd hate her for keeping it secret." I smiled faintly, tracing the rim of my teacup. "Oh, I was confused, certainly. But hate her? No. You don't hate someone who saves your life." Later that evening, Elise sent me a message. "I found a few safer cookware sets online, Mom. Stainless steel, non-toxic glaze, good reviews. Want me to come by tomorrow to help you choose?" I typed back, "Yes, dear. And stay for dinner." "I'll let you cook this time," she replied with a laughing emoji, followed by a small red heart. The next day, she arrived with a notebook tucked under her arm. Her research notebook, full of pages of notes, test results, and neatly clipped printouts about safe cookware materials. Together, we spread everything across the dining table. She talked me through each brand, explaining the differences with patience and care. As she spoke, I found myself watching the gentle precision in her tone, the way her brow furrowed when she got excited, the warmth in her voice when she called me Mom. It was then that I realized something deeply humbling. She wasn't trying to replace me or question me. She was trying to learn from me, just in her own cautious, modern way. When the new cookware arrived a few days later, she insisted on helping me unbox everything. The polished steel gleamed under the kitchen light, a quiet promise of new beginnings. We washed them together, side by side, sleeves rolled up, laughing over soap bubbles that refused to stay contained. As we cooked our first meal together, her recipe for lentil stew, I noticed how naturally we moved around each other. No awkward hesitations, no silent battles for space, just rhythm and trust. At one point, she turned to me and said, "You know, I was terrified of cooking in your kitchen the first few times I came here." "Why's that?" I asked. She smiled shyly. "Because you're you. Everything was so perfect. I didn't want to ruin anything." I laughed softly. "Oh, Elise, you can't ruin something that's built with love. It just changes shape, that's all." For a moment, she looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw it then. The woman my son had fallen in love with. Not timid, not aloof. Just gentle in a world that often mistakes gentleness for weakness. When Daniel came home that evening, the kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of our shared meal. He stood in the doorway, smiling as he watched us fuss over the final touches. "Well," he said, folding his arms, "I never thought I'd see the day you two cooked together." Elise grinned. "It's a collaboration. She's the teacher. I'm the student." "Hardly," I said, rolling my eyes. "You're the scientist here," Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Whatever you're doing, it smells incredible." Dinner that night felt like a healing ritual, not because of the food, but because of what it represented. Every spoonful, every shared laugh, every gentle nudge of conversation mended something I hadn't realized was broken. Afterward, when Elise offered to do the dishes, I stopped her. "Leave them," I said. "Let's sit for a while." We settled at the table, sipping tea. Outside, the evening light filtered through the curtains, painting the kitchen in a warm, honeyed glow. "I've been thinking," I said softly, "about how easy it is to misread people." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I thought you didn't like my cooking. That maybe you didn't trust me. But you were just careful, trying to help." Her lips curved into a tender smile. "I never wanted you to feel that way. You're the heart of this family, Mom. I just didn't know how to say things without making it sound like I was accusing you." I nodded slowly. Sometimes love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, alive like the pause between two notes that make the melody richer. As she left that night, she hugged me tightly, not the polite, tentative kind we'd exchanged before, but the real kind that lingers, the kind that says, "I see you now." When the door closed, I stood there for a long time, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like an old, familiar blanket, and I realized that sometimes the people who seem distant aren't pulling away. They're reaching out in the only way they know how. Love has many languages. Elise's just happened to be science, patience, and quiet devotion, and I was finally ready to listen. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of our Sundays returned, but it was different now. The laughter was lighter, the air easier to breathe. The weight that once sat between us, quiet and invisible, was gone. Elise still brought her little cooler bag sometimes, but not for herself anymore. It was filled with groceries she'd picked up for me, fresh herbs, organic vegetables, new spices she thought I'd like. "You've always cooked with love," she'd say with that shy smile. "I'm just adding a touch of science." At first, I found her fussing amusing, but then I grew to admire it. She had an attention to detail that reminded me of myself when I was younger, before arthritis, before loss, before years had softened the sharp edges of my ambition. There was something profoundly comforting about watching her in my kitchen, confident yet gentle, moving with quiet purpose. One Sunday, I sat at the table while she chopped onions, her hair tied back neatly, her expression focused. I found myself asking, "Did you always love cooking, Elise?" She glanced up, smiling faintly. "Not really. My mom wasn't much of a cook." But after she passed, I realized food was a way of remembering, of holding on. There was a softness in her tone that tugged at me. "What did you hold on to?" She hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "Her way of caring." She wasn't expressive, didn't say "I love you" often, but she'd always leave little things. A packed lunch, a note, something simple, I guess. I learned love doesn't always announce itself. I smiled. "No, it doesn't. Sometimes it whispers." She looked up at me then, her eyes glistening. And in that shared stillness, something unspoken passed between us and understanding, woman to woman, mother to daughter, beyond words or generations. After that day, we started cooking together every week. Sometimes I'd teach her my old recipes. Sometimes she'd introduce me to new ones. We'd laugh over spilled flour, swap stories over simmering pots, and learn the rhythm of each other's hearts through the language of shared meals. It wasn't lost on me how healing that kitchen became. The same space where suspicion had once lingered now bloomed with warmth and renewal. The same pots that had once harmed were replaced by ones that sustained us. Daniel often joined us after work, and he'd stand in the doorway watching, smiling like a boy again. "You two could open a restaurant," he'd tease. I'd laugh and wave a wooden spoon at him. "Only if you wash the dishes," he'd grin. Deal. But beneath the jokes, I could tell he was grateful. He'd once confessed in a quiet moment, "You and Elise, you're the two halves of my world. I don't know what I'd do if you didn't get along." And I told him something I hadn't realized until then. Sometimes, son, love doesn't arrive the way we expect it to. It sneaks in through kindness, through care, through small acts that keep us safe without us even knowing. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "That sounds like something you'd say in one of your stories." Maybe it was. Maybe this was the kind of story I'd always believed in, one where love wasn't loud, but steady, where healing came not through grand gestures, but through quiet truth. Months later, Elise surprised me with a small notebook. On the first page, in her neat handwriting, she'd written, "Recipes for a safer kitchen inspired by Mom." I turned the pages slowly. Inside were my recipes, carefully rewritten and modernized. Notes in the margins explained substitutions, healthier methods, safer cookware tips, all written with affection and respect. My throat tightened. "You did all this for me?" She smiled a bit shyly. "For us. For the next generation, too. Maybe one day our daughter will learn from it." I froze. "Your daughter?" She blushed, her eyes bright. "We found out last week. It's still early, but yes." The words filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. I reached across the table and took her hands. "Oh, Elise." "That's wonderful." In that moment, the world seemed to tilt slightly, as though every past doubt, every fear, every misunderstanding had been leading to this quiet circle of life continuing, safe and strong. Over the following months, as Elise's belly grew, I found myself busier than I'd been in years. Knitting tiny sweaters, reworking old recipes into lighter, nutrient-rich versions, and researching everything I could about pregnancy-safe foods. Sometimes, I'd catch her watching me, that same grateful softness in her eyes. "You remind me of my mom," she told me one evening. "And you remind me of mine," I said. Strong, kind, and smarter than she ever admitted. We laughed then. Two women from different generations, meeting somewhere in the middle, bound not just by family, but by understanding. When baby Grace was born, I held her for the first time in that same kitchen. The late afternoon light fell across her tiny face, her small fingers curling around mine. Elise stood beside me, tired but radiant. "She's perfect," I whispered. Elise smiled, resting her head against my shoulder. "She'll grow up knowing what love tastes like." And as I rocked my granddaughter, I realized that love really did have a flavor. Sometimes it was sweet, sometimes savory, sometimes bittersweet. But it always nourished, always healed. From that day forward, every time I cooked, I thought of Elise and Grace. I thought of how life has a strange way of revealing what matters most, not through the storms, but through the gentle unraveling that follows, because sometimes it takes a misunderstanding to open our eyes. Sometimes it takes silence to hear the truth. And sometimes it takes a woman who brings her own food to teach another how to live again. Years slipped by quietly, as they tend to when life finally finds its rhythm. Seasons changed, faces softened with age, and laughter found its way into even the smallest corners of our home. The kitchen, once a place of tension and misunderstanding, became the heart of everything that mattered: birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners, and rainy day soups that healed more than they nourished. Now, when I wake in the mornings, I hear the gentle sound of Grace's feet running down the hallway before I even open my eyes. "Grandma, pancakes!" she shouts, her little voice brimming with the kind of joy that makes every ache worth it. I rise slowly, my joints reminding me of time's passage, and head to the kitchen. It's not the same space it used to be. The walls are a lighter color, the shelves rearranged by Elise's practical hands. But it's beautiful in a way I never expected. The sunlight glows warmly against the steel pots, the very ones she once insisted I buy. Safe, clean, and quietly gleaming. Elise joins me a few minutes later, hair still damp from her morning shower, humming softly. She moves around the kitchen as though she's always belonged there, because she does. Our once careful dance around one another has become instinctive, wordless. She knows where I keep everything, and I know the rhythm of her movements by heart. Grace climbs onto her little stool, helping to mix the batter. "Mommy says pancakes make people happy," she says proudly, pouring the milk with both hands. I smile. "Your mommy's very wise," Elise laughs. "She learned from the best, and there it is, the warmth that never fails to soften my chest." That one sentence, simple and light, carries the weight of everything we've become. We eat together at the table, sunlight pooling across the worn wood, syrup dripping carelessly onto napkins. Grace chatters between bites, telling stories about school, her friends, and how she wants to be a cooker like Grandma. Elise squeezes my hand under the table, her eyes shining. "She watches you, you know. Every move, every word." I glance at Grace, who's now concentrating hard on cutting her pancake into perfect squares. Then I'd better be worth watching. After breakfast, Elise insists on cleaning up while I sit with my tea. I watch her moving around the kitchen, the way her hands glide effortlessly, the same hands that once trembled when they first opened a spice jar here. I remember that woman nervous, cautious, misunderstood. And I remember myself proud, protective, blind in my own way. We've both changed. We've both grown. When Grace runs off to play, Elise joins me at the table. "You know," she says softly, "sometimes I still think about that day." "The day I told you about the lead," I smile faintly. "I do too," she laughs gently. "I was terrified. I thought you'd never speak to me again." I reach across the table, brushing her hand. "You gave me back my health, my kitchen, and my son's peace of mind. And in return, I gave you what I should have from the start, trust." She nods, eyes glistening. "I didn't just want you to like me, Mom. I wanted you to know I saw you. Everything you do for this family, it matters." Her words sink deep, touching places I didn't even know still needed healing. Because for all the years I spent cooking, caring, giving, I never quite realized that being seen is its own kind of nourishment. In the late afternoon, Daniel comes home early from work. He kisses Elise, lifts Grace high into the air, and then hugs me, the kind of hug that still carries traces of boyhood. "Smells like home," he says, taking in the air thick with vanilla and butter. "Your daughter's the chef today," I say proudly. He grins. Runs in the family. We all end up outside on the porch that evening, the golden hour casting long shadows across the garden. Grace chases butterflies while Daniel helps Elise cover the plants before nightfall. I sit in my rocking chair, wrapped in a light shawl, watching them, the family I never knew I needed in exactly this way. As the sun dips below the horizon, Elise joins me with a cup of tea. "Do you ever miss your old kitchen?" she asks softly. I think for a moment, then shake my head. No, that kitchen taught me lessons, but this one gave me life. The old one was filled with pride. This one's filled with love. She smiles, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "You've changed, Mom. So have you, dear." That's what love does. It doesn't stay still. For a while, we sit there in silence, listening to the wind move gently through the trees. Grace's laughter carries across the yard, pure and unburdened. The kind of sound that tells you everything's exactly as it should be. I think back to that first day, the suspicion, the tension, the quiet ache of misunderstanding. And then I look at the woman beside me, my daughter not by blood but by choice and time and heart, and I feel nothing but gratitude. Because love, I've learned, doesn't always announce itself in grand gestures or poetic words. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a cautious daughter-in-law bringing her own food, trying to protect a stubborn old woman who thought she knew everything. Sometimes it arrives quietly and changes everything forever. As night falls, I whisper a small prayer of thanks for Grace. In every form it has found me, and as I watch Elise and Daniel carry Grace inside, laughter spilling through the doorway, I think to myself, the kitchen doesn't just feed the body, it feeds the heart. And sometimes it takes losing your old recipes to discover the real meaning of home. The years continue to pass with a kind of graceful quiet, the kind you don't notice until one day you realize time has wrapped around you like a well-loved quilt. My hair turned silver, my steps slowed, and the lines on my hands deepened, but my heart, somehow, felt lighter than it ever had in my youth. Elise often teased me that I'd outlive them all. "You're too stubborn to go anywhere," she'd say with that easy laugh that used to be so rare when we first met. "Stubborn keeps me upright," I'd reply, smiling. And besides, someone has to make sure Grace doesn't burn the kitchen down. Because now, Grace was no longer that little girl with syrup-sticky fingers. She was 16, tall, bright-eyed, full of opinions and boundless kindness. She had her mother's steadiness and, if I might flatter myself, a touch of my warmth. She'd taken to cooking the way most girls her age took to music or fashion. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen, hunched over a notebook, much like the one Elise had once given me. She was scribbling furiously, murmuring to herself, "What are you plotting there, young lady?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. She looked up, grinning. "A recipe book. I'm calling it Generations of Grace." The name hit me like a gentle wave. "That's beautiful," she shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I want to include all your recipes, Grandma. Yours, Mom's, and maybe some of mine too. You know, so nothing gets lost." I smiled, walking closer to peek at her pages. Her handwriting curved with care. "I think that's the best idea anyone's ever had," she grinned proudly. "Mom says you taught her everything she knows about cooking." "Your mother taught me plenty too," I said softly. "She taught me to listen with my heart instead of my pride." Grace tilted her head. "Is that why you two get along so well now?" I chuckled. "That's part of it. But mostly we learned that love doesn't always speak the same language. You just have to be patient enough to learn someone else's." Later that day, when Elise came home from work, she joined me on the porch for tea. The light was golden, filtering through the trees, painting everything in that familiar amber glow. "She's starting her own recipe book," I told her. Elise smiled softly. "Of course she is. She's your granddaughter." I looked at her, really looked, and saw all the years etched into the corners of her eyes, the laughter, the tears, the strength it took to hold a family together quietly, the way women so often do. "Elise," I began gently, "I've been thinking about something." She turned to me, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" I hesitated, choosing my words. "When I'm gone someday, I don't want you to stop using this kitchen. Promise me you'll keep cooking here. Keep making memories here." Her eyes glistened. "Mom, I mean it," I said softly. "This house has seen its share of mistakes and healing. It's not just mine anymore. It's ours. Yours, Daniel's, Grace's. I want it full of laughter and food long after I'm gone." She nodded, swallowing hard. "You're not going anywhere anytime soon." I smiled knowingly. "Maybe not. But time has its way, dear. We don't always get to choose how long we stay, only how much love we leave behind." A tear slipped down her cheek, and I reached over to wipe it away. "Don't cry, Elise. You gave me more years than I could have ever asked for. You gave me a second chance to understand love, not the kind that demands, but the kind that listens." We sat together quietly as the sun sank lower, the air cooling into the soft calm of evening. That night, long after they'd all gone to bed, I stayed awake at the kitchen table, pen in hand, writing a letter. The kind you seal but never deliver yourself. When the ink dried, I folded it carefully and tucked it inside Grace's new recipe notebook. Between the pages marked "Family Traditions." The letter began simply, "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, it means life has carried me to a gentler place. But don't be sad. Every recipe I've ever written, every meal we've ever shared, was a love letter in disguise, one meant to remind you that home isn't a house or a kitchen, but the people you feed and the memories you make together. Your mother once brought her own food here because she wanted to protect me. I once doubted her because I didn't understand. But we learned something precious, that love sometimes hides behind caution, and that family is built on forgiveness as much as affection. Promise me you'll keep that lesson close. Feed the people you love, even when words fail you. Let food be your kindness made visible. All my love. Grandma." When I sealed that envelope, I felt something inside me settle, not sadness, but peace. A quiet knowing that I had left behind something worth keeping. A few months later, my health began to falter. The doctors called it natural decline, though I preferred to think of it as my body finally slowing to the rhythm my soul had long been humming. One morning, Elise found me sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in hand, the sunrise spilling across my face. I smiled at her and said, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" And it was. I didn't know then that it would be my last morning, but I'm glad it was spent that way. In warmth, in love, in gratitude. They tell me that after the funeral, Elise cooked my favorite dish, the stew that started it all, but this time, she made it in one of our safe, shining pots. She and Grace served it to everyone who came, and together they laughed, cried, and remembered. Later, Grace found my letter, and when she read it, she wept. But then she smiled because she understood. She understood that my story, our story, wasn't about food at all. It was about love. Quiet, persistent, forgiving love, the kind that lingers long after the plates are cleared and the kitchen falls silent. It's been 15 years since Grandma passed, and yet every time I step into this kitchen, I still feel her presence. The light hits the counter just the way she liked it. The scent of rosemary seems to cling to the walls no matter how much we clean, and when the kettle whistles in the morning, I half expect to hear her voice saying, "Tea tastes better when you're not rushing." I'm 31 now, married and with a daughter of my own, little Emma, who has the same bright eyes and curious heart I once did. She sits at the table as I cook, swinging her legs, humming softly. And sometimes when she laughs, I swear I hear echoes of Grandma in that sound. The house hasn't changed much. The same soft yellow curtains flutter by the window. The same wooden table stands in the center, though the chairs have been replaced more than once. The air is still warm here, still kind. After Grandma's passing, Mom couldn't bring herself to cook for a while. I remember finding her sitting on the floor of the pantry one night, holding one of Grandma's aprons, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She didn't hear me at first, but when she did, she smiled through her tears and said, "She taught me everything I know, but I never thought she'd leave me the one thing I wasn't ready for: silence." It took months before she cooked again. But when she did, she made Grandma's stew, slowly, carefully, with that same quiet reverence. That meal marked the beginning of something new for both of us, not an ending, but a continuation. Now, every Sunday, I cook that same stew. It's become our family's ritual. The smell alone is enough to draw everyone home: Mom, Dad, even my younger brother who lives 3 towns away. And as the pot simmers, filling the house with its rich, familiar aroma, I always take a moment to close my eyes and whisper, "We remember you," because we do. Every day. When I turned 25, Mom gave me Grandma's letter, the one she'd left tucked inside my old recipe book. I'd forgotten about it all those years, though I'd often felt like there was something waiting for me between those pages. I remember sitting right here at this table, reading her words for the first time. Her handwriting was a little shaky but still elegant, the same loops and flourishes I used to trace as a child. I must have read it a dozen times that night, each word sinking deeper into me. Feed the people you love, even when words fail you. Those words became the heartbeat of everything I've done since. I never became a chef, though everyone assumed I would. Instead, I opened a small community kitchen in town, a place where anyone can come cook, share a meal, or learn a recipe passed down from their family. We call it the Hearth Project, named after Grandma's favorite word for the kitchen. On the wall inside, there's a framed photo of her, the one of her standing proudly in her apron, holding a wooden spoon like it was a conductor's baton. Beneath it, engraved in brass, are her words, "Love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it feeds. People ask me about her all the time. I tell them she wasn't famous, didn't write books or appear on screens. But she had a gift that no fame could match. She made people feel safe. She taught me that the simplest act of care, like stirring a pot or sharing bread, can be a prayer." Mom volunteers at the hearth now. She teaches the Sunday lessons, where she walks people through Grandma's recipes and stories. Her hair has turned silver like Grandma's once was, and sometimes when she laughs, the resemblance takes my breath away. One afternoon, as we were cleaning up after a long day, Mom handed me something. It was wrapped in a faded blue cloth, soft and familiar. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled. "The last of your grandmother's old pots, one of the steel ones we bought together. I've kept it all these years. I think it's time it lived in your kitchen." I ran my hand along its surface, smooth, cool, unbroken. "It still looks new," Mom nodded. "Because we cared for it. Because it mattered." That night, I made stew in that pot for the first time. The smell was exactly as I remembered. Emma helped me stir, her little hands clumsy but eager. "Who's Grandma May?" she asked suddenly, looking up at me with those big, curious eyes. I smiled. "She's the reason we cook this meal every Sunday. Did she love you?" I paused, thinking of the quiet mornings, the soft wisdom, the way she'd watch us with eyes full of both patience and knowing. Very much. And she loves you too. You just haven't met her yet. Emma frowned, confused. But she's gone. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. People like her never really go, sweetheart. They live in the warmth of our kitchens, in the smell of stew, in the stories we tell. Every time you stir that pot, you're stirring a little bit of her love, too. Emma smiled then, small and certain. Then I'll stir a lot. I laughed softly and kissed her forehead. That's my girl. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen, the house quiet except for the slow ticking of the old wall clock. I looked around at the table where Grandma once sat, at the window where she used to watch the sunset, at the stove that now held her legacy, and I whispered, "You did it, Grandma. You saved us all in your own way, because she had. Through food, through patience, through love unspoken but always felt. Now, every person who steps through our door at the hearth, every family who learns to cook together, every child who tastes that stew, they're part of her story too. And one day, when Emma is grown, she'll make it for her children. And she'll tell them about the woman who taught us that the heart of a family isn't its history, it's its kindness." The hearth grew in ways none of us expected. What started as a single warm kitchen in our small town became something much larger, a movement, almost. People came from nearby cities, even other states, to visit, to cook, to share. We never advertised, never sought attention. We just opened our doors and kept the stove lit. Somehow that was enough. It turns out, love spreads quietly. We began collecting stories from those who came, handwritten notes from grandmothers, recipes from refugees, family dishes from people who'd lost everything but memory. They all came here, to our kitchen, to rebuild something invisible but essential. One man, a widower in his 60s, told me one evening as we cleaned up, "This place brought me back to life." I hadn't cooked since my wife passed. I didn't realize how much silence was sitting in my house until I came here and heard pots clanging again. A young mother once left a note taped to the door. "Thank you for reminding me that home isn't gone. It just moved somewhere new." Sometimes I'd stand at the back of the kitchen, watching it all, the noise, the laughter, the smells mixing together, and I'd feel tears sting my eyes. Not of sadness, but of recognition. Because I'd seen this before. In Grandma's kitchen, in the way she moved through it, how she turned ordinary moments into something sacred. Mom still runs her Sunday lessons. She's slower now, but her hands haven't forgotten their rhythm. When she stirs, people stop talking for a moment as if time bends to watch her. She always begins class the same way. Cooking is just memory you can taste, and every time she says it, I think of the day Elise, my mother, walked into Grandma's kitchen, trembling with fear, holding the truth that would save them both. If not for that day, the hearth wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be here, teaching others how to feed the people they love. Grandma's legacy didn't just survive, it multiplied. On our 10th anniversary, the mayor came to cut a ribbon for our new wing, a small expansion with more tables and a pantry for families who couldn't afford groceries. I wore Grandma's old apron that day. It was frayed and faded, but it felt like armor, like she was standing behind me, whispering, "Keep going, dear. Feed them all." After the speeches, Mom and I stood together near the new sign. The words gleamed in gold. The hearth. "A place to feed the soul." She squeezed my hand and whispered, "She'd be proud." I smiled, swallowing the ache that rose in my chest. She is. I feel her every day. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone at one of the tables. The lights dimmed, the air still heavy with the scent of baked bread. In front of me was Grandma's photo, the same one that had hung in our kitchen all those years ago. "Do you see, Grandma?" I whispered. "You didn't just feed us? You changed us." And in that quiet moment, it felt like she did see. Like her warmth filled the room again, wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. A few weeks later, I received a letter from a school teacher in another town. She wrote, "I visited the hearth last month and brought the idea back to my students. Now they're cooking meals for their elderly neighbors every Friday. You've inspired them to care through food." I read the letter 3 times. Each word felt like a small echo of Grandma's voice, rippling outward into the world. Mom cried when I showed it to her. "She'd love that," she said, wiping her eyes. That her lessons didn't stop with us, and she was right. Because what Grandma had taught us wasn't just how to cook, it was how to see people, how to listen when someone's silence says more than their words, how to love without needing to be right. A few months later, on the anniversary of Grandma's passing, we held our first evening of memory. Families brought their favorite dishes and shared the stories behind them. Some were funny, others heartbreaking, but every single one carried that thread of connection. When it was my turn, I told our story the story of a woman who thought her daughter-in-law didn't trust her, and a young woman who only wanted to protect the woman she loved like her own mother. I told them how misunderstanding turned into grace, and how that grace became generations of love. When I finished, there wasn't a sound in the room. Then someone began to clap. Then another. And suddenly, everyone was on their feet, not clapping for me, but for the people they'd loved and lost. The people who had taught them, in their own ways, what love really means. That night, as I stood under the soft glow of the lights, surrounded by faces glistening with tears and smiles, I realized something profound. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what continues because of you. The next morning, I brought Emma to the hearth before it opened. The air was cool and still, the countertops empty, the world not yet awake. She looked around, her small hand clutching mine. "Is this where Grandma May cooked?" she asked. I nodded. "And Mommy, and me. And someday maybe you," she grinned. "Can I start now?" I laughed softly. "What would you make?" "Something that smells like home," she said, her nose scrunching as she thought. "Maybe soup. Or cookies. Or both." And in that instant, with sunlight spilling through the windows and her laughter filling the room, I knew Grandma was here. Not in some distant, unreachable way, but in the simple rhythm of life continuing. Because the truth is, the heart of a family never stops beating. It just changes hands. 10 years later, the hearth has become more than a kitchen, it's a living story. When people step through its doors, they don't just smell food, they feel something intangible. Comfort. Memory. Safety. The walls hum with the energy of generations, and on certain quiet mornings, I swear the air still carries the faint scent of Grandma's stew. Emma is grown now 21, confident, curious, and full of warmth. She runs the hearth beside me, her presence so natural, so certain, that I sometimes catch myself watching her the way Grandma once watched me. With quiet pride. With awe, she has her own ideas, of course. "Mom," she said one day, while reorganizing the shelves, "we should add a storytelling night for the kids. Not just about food, but about the people behind the recipes." "That's a beautiful idea," I said, smiling. "Grandma May would love that." She paused, then turned to me. "Do you ever miss her?" I laughed softly, my throat tightening. "Every day. But I also see her every day in you, in this place, in the way you smile when someone tastes something new and their whole face lights up." "That's her, Emma. That's her and you." She smiled then, that soft, knowing smile that runs in our bloodline. "Then I'll make sure no one forgets her." That night, we lit candles around the hearth. The lights glowed low and warm, casting gentle shadows that danced across the walls. The first story night began with just a few families sitting in a circle, holding plates of warm food. But as the stories unfolded, something beautiful happened. Strangers started nodding at each other, finishing one another's sentences, laughing through tears. A woman spoke about her mother teaching her to make dumplings by hand, and how she used to hide notes inside for her children. A man told of his father who couldn't say "I love you," but woke early every morning to make breakfast for the family. A young boy said his grandma always hummed when she cooked, so the food wouldn't get lonely. When it was my turn, I stood holding one of Grandma's old wooden spoons, the same one she'd used all her life, its handle smooth and worn. "I come from a line of women who believed food was love," I began softly. "My grandmother May was one of them. She thought feeding others was her purpose, and maybe it was. But she also taught me something I didn't understand until much later, that love can be quiet, and that care doesn't always look the way we expect it to." I told them about Elise, my mother, and how she'd once brought her own food to Grandma's house, not out of pride or distrust, but out of protection. I told them how that act of care, misunderstood at first, saved a life and changed the way our family loved forever. By the time I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Emma, sitting near the front, had her hands pressed together, eyes shining with tears. When everyone began to clap softly, I looked around the room and saw it again, that ripple effect of love passing quietly from one person to the next. Just like Grandma used to say, love doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stay. Afterward, as the guests left and the candles burned low, Emma came up to me. "Mom," she said quietly, "I think it's time we expand the hearth again." "Expand?" I asked, surprised. She nodded, eyes glowing with the same kind of vision Elise once had. "To other towns? Maybe even schools. You always said Grandma's love should keep going, right? Then let's carry it further. Let's teach more people to listen, to care, to feed each other." I felt my heart swell. She was right. Grandma's story wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to anyone who'd ever fed someone out of love. We spent the next year building partnerships with local schools, senior homes, and shelters. Everywhere the hearth went, it became more than just a kitchen. It became a reminder that nourishment is more than food. It's connection. It's empathy. It's legacy. And sometimes late at night, when the hearth is quiet and everyone has gone home, I walk through the kitchen alone. The smell of spices lingers in the air, and I run my fingers over the counter, smooth from years of stories. I can almost hear her. That soft, measured voice. That calm certainty. "You see, dear," she whispers in memory, "you don't need to be extraordinary to leave something that lasts. You just need to love with your hands." I close my eyes, smile, and whisper back, "I understand now." The next morning, Emma and I begin a new day at the hearth. The sun pours through the windows, filling every corner with light. A new group of visitors arrives, young couples, old friends, children holding their parents' hands. They come carrying recipes, memories, and hope. Emma greets them with the same grace her grandmother once had. "Welcome home," she says warmly, because that's what the hearth is now. Home. For anyone who needs to feel seen, remembered, or fed in a way that words can't manage. As I watch her lead them in, I whisper softly to myself, "Grandma, your kitchen never ended. It just got bigger." And in that moment, I know with absolute certainty that she's here. In every simmering pot, every whispered story, every act of quiet kindness that passes through these doors. Love, after all, doesn't fade. It evolves, it deepens. It learns new names, and if you listen closely, sometimes it still hums from the kitchen. I never thought I'd take over the hearth so soon. Mom used to joke that she'd haunt the kitchen before she ever let it go. And maybe she has, because some mornings, when I unlock the doors and step into the stillness before dawn, I feel her here. In the light, in the air, in the quiet hum of memory that lives between the walls. My name is Emma, and I'm the third woman to keep this flame alive. Grandma Grace built the hearth from love. Her mother, Elise, built it from courage. And May, the woman who began it all, built it from faith. 3 women, 3 generations, bound by one belief: that food could mend what words could not. Now it's my turn. The world feels different these days, faster, louder, more fragmented. People scroll instead of speak. Meals are eaten in cars or in silence. But every time I watch someone walk into the hearth and pause, just pause to breathe in the smell of warm bread or soup, I see it happen again. That small, invisible shift. That remembering. They remember they belong somewhere. Today marks 35 years since the hearth first opened. The kitchen looks almost the same. The same copper pans hang above the counter. The same recipe cards, yellowed at the edges, rest in a frame by the stove. The same wooden spoon Grandma May's sits on the shelf, carved initials fading but never forgotten. We've grown, of course. There are hearth centers in 5 towns now, all run by people who once stood right here in this very room. They carry the same quiet mission in their hearts: feed the soul first, the stomach second. This morning, we're hosting our annual Day of Memory. Families from all over are coming to share their dishes and stories. I've been up since dawn, preparing the stew, her stew, the same one that started it all. The pot bubbles steadily, steam curling upward like incense, and the air feels holy somehow. As I stir, I think about the legacy I've inherited, not the building, not the recipes, but the essence. Grandma Grace used to say that every family has a story, and that food is just its language. I think she was right. Some people write their love into letters or build it into walls. We cooked ours into every grain of rice, every spoon of broth, every shared bite across time. Mom passed 5 years ago, peacefully. She'd spent the day teaching a children's class, laughing as flour dusted her hair. That night, she fell asleep with a smile. When I found her the next morning, her hands were still folded gently on her chest. On the table beside her was a note. Only 5 words. Keep them fed with love, and I have. I must, because to stop would be to silence generations of love that worked too hard to be heard. By noon, the kitchen fills with life. Laughter bounces off the walls. Children chase each other between tables. Elderly couples sit side by side, holding hands as they tell stories of meals cooked in tiny apartments or over open fires long ago. Every dish tells a truth. Every person carries a memory that tastes like something, and when I stand before them all, spoon in hand, I feel a warmth that starts in my chest and spreads outward. Steady and certain, thank you for being here, I tell them. This place was built by women who believed love could outlast time. And they were right, it has. It's right here in you, in this food, in the stories we keep telling. The room falls silent, soft, but alive. Some people are crying, others are smiling, but everyone is listening. I ladle out the first bowl of stew and place it in front of an elderly woman sitting near the front. Her hands tremble slightly as she takes it. This smells like my mother's kitchen, she whispers. I smile. Then it's working. Because that's the magic of this place, it finds the lost parts of people and brings them home, if only for a meal. Later, after everyone has eaten and the crowd begins to thin, I stand alone again by the stove. The pot is nearly empty, just a few spoonfuls left. I take a seat at the old wooden table, tracing the worn grooves with my fingertips. This table has seen everything: births, deaths, laughter, silence. It has held grief and grace in equal measure. Outside, the sun begins to set, washing the sky in hues of gold and rose. For a moment, I imagine them all here: Grandma May, Elise and Grace May, with her wise, steady eyes, Elise, with her quiet determination, and Grace, with her gentle, knowing smile. They're standing in the soft light, side by side. Proud and peaceful, I whisper into the fading air. It's still going. Your kitchen, your love, it's still feeding the world. And maybe it's just my imagination, or maybe it's something more. But I swear I hear May's voice calm and sure as ever. Good. Then it was never just food. I close my eyes and smile. No, Grandma, it never was. The last light slips through the windows, settling across the table like a benediction. I stand, place the old spoon beside the pot, and whisper, see you tomorrow, because I will, because love, once fed, never dies. And tomorrow, when I open the hearth's doors again, someone new will walk in carrying a story that needs to be heard, and I'll listen, I'll feed them, and the circle will continue. 50 years have passed since the hearth first opened its doors. The building has changed, yet somehow it hasn't. The bricks are newer, the oven's more efficient, the lights softer, but the feeling, that quiet warmth that welcomes you the moment you cross the threshold, remains exactly the same. The hearth now lives in cities and villages across the country. There's one by the sea, another nestled in a mountain town, and even one near the university where I sometimes teach. Every branch carries the same promise carved above the entrance in simple brass letters. Love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it feeds. When visitors ask where it all began, I take them to the original kitchen. It's been preserved as a museum of sorts, though I still cook there every now and then. The walls are lined with framed photos of the women who came before me. Grandma May, graceful and strong. Elise, thoughtful and brave. Grace, gentle and radiant. Their eyes seem to follow me as I move through the room, reminding me that I am part of something vast and tender. A chain of love that began long before me, and I pray, will stretch far beyond my years. I am 70 now. My hair has gone silver like theirs once did. My hands are slower, but my heart, oh, it still stirs as easily as ever. Each morning, I tie my apron, light the stove, and whisper the same quiet prayer. Let someone feel loved today. And every day, someone does. Today, a group of children visit from the local school. They gather around the counter, wide-eyed as I show them how to knead dough. Their laughter fills the room, bright and unguarded. One little girl with freckles and missing front teeth looks up at me and asks, Miss Emma, why do we have to mix it with our hands? Can't a machine do it faster? I smile, dusting flour from my palms. Of course it can, sweetheart. But hands remember things machines don't. She frowns, thinking it over. Like what? Like love, I say softly. Like patience. Like the warmth that makes food taste like home. She grins, her small hands diving into the dough with renewed enthusiasm. Around her, the others do the same, giggling as flour clouds the air. And in that moment, I feel the years collapse time folding gently upon itself. I see Grandma May teaching me teaching Grace, Grace teaching her own children. Generations of hands, all doing the same sacred thing, creating care from the simplest ingredients. After the children leave, the kitchen falls quiet again. I walk to the window where the afternoon sun streams in, painting everything gold. The same window Grandma once stood by, gazing out into her garden. I think of how far her love has traveled from a single kitchen, to a family, to a movement that feeds souls across the world, and yet, in its essence, it has never been about scale. It has always been about that one person, the single heart that walks in hungry for something deeper than food. I pour myself a cup of tea and sit at the old wooden table. Its surface is worn smooth from decades of elbows, hands, and stories. I run my fingers over its grooves familiar as my own heartbeat. Sometimes, late at night, I reread the old letters. The ones from visitors, students, and families whose lives have been touched by the hearth. I keep them all in a wooden box beneath the counter, labeled Gratitude. One reads, "My son and I hadn't spoken in 3 years. We came to the hearth and cooked together for the first time since he was little. When we sat down to eat, we didn't talk about what went wrong. We just smiled. That was enough." Another says, "I lost my husband last winter. Coming here gave me a reason to get out of bed again. Thank you for letting me remember what warmth feels like." I read these letters slowly, carefully, as though each word is a heartbeat from someone else's life. Because in a way it is. The hearth isn't just my family's legacy. It belongs to everyone who ever believed that kindness could be tasted. As evening falls, I light the lanterns that line the shelves. Their glow flickers softly, reflecting off the steel pots. I imagine the women before me standing here once more, May, Elise, Grace, and behind them, all the unnamed women of the world who ever fed someone simply because they cared. I whisper into the warm stillness. "We did it, Grandma. You began a ripple that became a tide. And if I close my eyes, I can almost feel her hand on my shoulder steady, reassuring. No, dear, I hear her say. We did it together." I smile through my tears. Yes, together. Outside, the night deepens. The stars appear one by one, quiet and patient. I sip my tea and let the peace of it settle in my bones. Tomorrow I'll return again. I'll open the doors, light the stove, welcome whoever walks in. Because the world still needs places like this where love isn't spoken, but shared. Where strangers become family. Where food becomes faith. Before I turn off the lights, I take one last look at the kitchen, the soft gleam of pots, the lingering scent of bread, the framed photo of 3 women whose love built a legacy. And then, softly, I say the words that have ended every day of my life for as long as I can remember. See you tomorrow. Because love, when tended to, never ends. It just waits quietly, faithfully for the next pair of hands to keep it warm. The years have thinned, and time has slowed into something soft. My hands, once strong and sure, now tremble slightly as I tie my apron each morning. Still, I come here to the kitchen where it all began. The hearth doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks for presence. The air is warm, the light golden. I move through the space like through memory, slow, deliberate, grateful. Each drawer, each worn handle, each echo of laughter feels alive with ghosts I no longer fear. They're not haunting me. They're holding me. Sometimes the younger volunteers ask, "Miss Emma, aren't you tired?" I smile and tell them, "No, dear. I'm seasoned." They laugh, and the sound reminds me of the first time Grandma May taught me to stir without rushing. "Let it breathe," she'd said, "and it'll tell you when it's ready." Maybe that's what life is, too. A long simmer. 1,000 small acts of love given quietly until they're enough to fill a lifetime. Today, I'm teaching Emma's daughter, little Lila, how to make the family stew. She's only 8, but she's already curious, already certain. She stands on a stool, spoon in hand, hair tied back like her great-great-grandmother's. "Like this, Grandma?" she asks, stirring carefully. "Perfect," I whisper. "You've got the rhythm of it," she grins. "It smells like stories." I laugh softly, the sound catching in my throat. That's exactly what it is, sweetheart. We ladle the stew together side by side, her small hands steady against mine. The room fills with the scent of memory herbs, warmth, and a hint of something eternal. Later, as the day fades and the last visitors leave, I sit by the old table, watching the light spill across the wood. Lila is drawing at the counter, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. She's sketching the hearth, all of it, in crayons and love. I realize then that the circle is complete. The same love that began with May has flowed through us all, changing shape but never fading. It's alive here in this child's laughter, in the soup's steam, in the way people still say thank you before their first bite. Before I leave, I write one last note in the family journal. The same one that's been passed down for nearly a century. To whoever stirs this pot next, remember that what you make here isn't just food. It's memory. It's forgiveness. It's home. Keep it warm. I close the book gently, my heart full. Outside, the lanterns flicker to life, one by one, like stars waking up. I linger a moment longer, breathing it all in. The scent of love still strong, the hum of belonging still steady, and as I step out into the night, I whisper the words that have carried through generations, from May to Elise, from Grace to me, from me to Lila, see you tomorrow. Because love once kindled never dies, it only waits for the next hand to stir.